Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat alone in the dimly lit intelligence room at Naval Base Coronado, her eyes burning from 16 straight hours of staring at satellite images. Outside the reinforced windows, the California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. But Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the screen in front of her, where a pattern had emerged that made her blood run cold. For 3 weeks, she had been tracking unusual vessel movements in the South China Sea. Most of her colleagues had dismissed the activity as routine fishing boats or commercial traffic, but Sarah saw something different. She saw a pattern. She saw coordination. She saw a threat. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up image after image. There, in grid sector 7 Alpha 3, a cluster of vessels had assembled. They looked ordinary enough at first glance. But when Sarah overlaid the images from different days, the pattern became clear. These boats were moving in calculated formations. They were positioning themselves at strategic intervals. And most concerning of all, they were doing it in waters dangerously close to American naval routes. Sarah's heart pounded as she double-checked her coordinates. She ran the analysis again, then again. Each time, the same conclusion emerged. This wasn't random. This was planned. This was deliberate. And if her calculations were correct, American ships would be sailing directly into this zone within 72 hours. She grabbed her tablet and rushed down the corridor toward Admiral Morrison's office. Her shoes echoed against the polished floors as she walked faster, clutching the evidence she had spent weeks compiling. This was it. This was the moment she had trained for during her 8 years in naval intelligence. This was why she had sacrificed time with her family, why she had worked through holidays, why she had pushed herself to be the best analyst in her division. But as she approached the Admiral's office, she heard laughter coming from inside. Male voices, deep and confident, were discussing weekend golf plans. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, her hand raised to knock. Then she remembered what was at stake. American lives. American sailors who trusted people like her to keep them safe. She knocked firmly. "Enter," came the Admiral's gruff voice. Sarah stepped inside to find Admiral Morrison behind his massive oak desk, flanked by 2 senior officers she recognized, Commander Wells and Captain Patterson. All 3 men looked up at her with expressions that ranged from mild curiosity to barely concealed annoyance. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Morrison said, glancing at his watch. "This better be important. We were just wrapping up." "Sir, it is important," Sarah said, moving forward and placing her tablet on his desk. "I've discovered a potential threat in the South China Sea. Unknown vessels assembling in a strategic pattern near our naval routes. I have coordinates and movement predictions. Sir, I believe this is a planned operation, and the USS Fitzgerald is scheduled to pass through this area in less than 3 days." Admiral Morrison barely glanced at the screen. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair and exchanged a look with Commander Wells. It was a look Sarah had seen before, a look that said, "Here we go again." "Lieutenant," the Admiral said slowly, as if explaining something to a child, "we receive dozens of reports like this every week. The South China Sea is one of the busiest maritime regions in the world. Boats cluster, ships cross paths. It's normal." "Sir, with respect, this isn't normal," Sarah insisted, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. "I've analyzed 3 weeks of satellite data. These vessels are coordinating their movements. The pattern is too precise to be coincidental. If you look at the thermal imaging here—" "Lieutenant Chen," Captain Patterson interrupted, not even trying to hide his impatience. "How long have you been in naval intelligence? 8 years, 9? 8 years, sir. I've been doing this for 26 years, Patterson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And in those 26 years, I've seen junior analysts get excited about shadows and fishing boats more times than I can count. You're seeing patterns that aren't there." Sarah felt heat rising to her face, but she kept her composure. "Sir, I've accounted for normal maritime traffic. I've filtered out commercial vessels. I've cross-referenced with known fishing zones and seasonal patterns. What remains is an anomaly that requires investigation." Commander Wells chuckled. It wasn't a kind sound. "An anomaly," he repeated as if the word itself was amusing. Admiral, I think the lieutenant has been working too hard. Maybe she needs some time off, fresh air, clear her head. Admiral Morrison held up a hand, silencing Wells, but his expression was no more sympathetic. He finally picked up the tablet and scrolled through Sarah's analysis for perhaps 15 seconds before setting it back down. Lieutenant Chen, he said, his tone final, I appreciate your diligence, I really do. But we cannot scramble resources and redirect naval operations based on speculation. These coordinates you've highlighted show fishing vessels. The pattern you're seeing is confirmation bias. You've convinced yourself there's a threat, so now everything looks suspicious. But sir, that's enough, Lieutenant. The Admiral's voice hardened. I'm dismissing your report. The Fitzgerald will proceed on its scheduled route. We have actual intelligence priorities that need attention, not ghost hunts in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing. She had expected skepticism. She had prepared for questions. But she hadn't prepared for complete dismissal without even a proper review of her evidence. Sir, I'm requesting that you at least pass this information to the Fitzgerald's captain. Let them be aware. Let them increase their alert status. That's all I'm asking. Admiral Morrison stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Lieutenant, your request is denied. This meeting is over. I suggest you get some rest and return to your assigned duties tomorrow with a fresh perspective. Sarah wanted to argue. Every fiber of her being screamed to make them listen, but military protocol was clear. She had presented her case. It had been rejected. Continuing to push would be insubordination. Yes, sir, she said quietly, taking back her tablet. As she turned to leave, she heard Commander Wells mutter to Captain Patterson just loud enough for her to hear. Chen's always been a bit overeager, trying to prove herself, I guess. You know how it is. Patterson's reply was equally audible. Someone should tell her that working hard isn't the same as working smart. All that data crunching and she can't tell the difference between a fishing fleet and a military operation. Their laughter followed her out into the hallway. Sarah walked back to her office in a daze. Her hands trembled as she set down her tablet. She had done everything right. She had followed protocol. She had presented solid evidence and she had been dismissed. Not just dismissed, mocked. She sank into her chair and stared at the satellite images still displayed on her monitors. The vessel clusters stared back at her, their positions marked with red dots that seemed to pulse with danger. Was she wrong? Had she really let her eagerness cloud her judgment? Sarah forced herself to review the data one more time, looking for any flaw in her analysis, any mistake that would prove the Admiral right. But there was no mistake. The pattern was real. The threat was real, and in 72 hours, the USS Fitzgerald would sail directly into it. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small apartment off base, surrounded by printouts and her personal laptop, reviewing every piece of data she had collected. The walls of her living room were now covered with maps, satellite images, and handwritten notes tracking the vessel movements. To anyone else, it might have looked like the obsessive work of someone losing touch with reality. But to Sarah, it was the clearest thing she had ever seen. By 3 a.m, she had made a decision. If the Admiral wouldn't listen through official channels, she would build an even stronger case. She would document everything so thoroughly, so meticulously, that it would be impossible to ignore. She returned to the base at dawn before most of the day shift arrived. The intelligence room was quiet, just the hum of computers and the soft glow of monitors. Sarah logged in and began pulling every piece of related data she could access. Radio frequency patterns, weather reports, historical military movements in the region, commercial shipping schedules. She built a comprehensive picture that went far beyond her initial analysis. What she found made her hands shake. The vessels weren't just clustering randomly. They were positioning themselves in a classic encirclement pattern. And based on their current trajectory, they would be in optimal position exactly when the USS Fitzgerald was scheduled to pass through. This wasn't coincidence. This was a planned intercept. You're here early. Sarah jumped at the voice. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. Marcus was one of the few colleagues who had always treated her with respect. They had gone through training together and he had never once questioned her abilities because she was a woman. Couldn't sleep, Sarah admitted. Marcus walked over and handed her one of the coffees. Then he saw the screens. His easy smile faded as he took in the data displayed across multiple monitors. "This is about those coordinates you brought to Morrison, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "How did you know about that?" Marcus grimaced. "Sarah, everyone knows. Wells and Patterson have been telling the story at the officers' club. They think it's hilarious. The girl who cried wolf, they're calling you. Said you tried to convince the Admiral that fishing boats were a Chinese naval operation." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back the anger and humiliation. "That's not what I said. I never specified Chinese naval. I said unknown vessels in a suspicious pattern." "I know." Marcus pulled up a chair beside her. "But that's not how they're telling it. They're making you sound paranoid, hysterical." The word hit Sarah like a slap. Hysterical. It was the same word that had followed her throughout her career. When she had reported a security breach during her first assignment, she had been called hysterical. When she had questioned a flawed intelligence assessment in her 3rd year, she had been told she was being emotional. Never mind that she had been right both times. The label stuck. "Marcus, look at this," Sarah said, turning back to her monitors. "Really look. This isn't paranoia. This is real." For the next 20 minutes she walked him through everything. The vessel movements, the patterns, the timing, the thermal signatures that suggested these weren't ordinary fishing boats. Marcus listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. "This is solid work, Sarah," he finally said. "This is really solid. Have you shown Morrison all of this?" He wouldn't look at it. Dismissed it in less than a minute. Marcus rubbed his face. Okay, what about going over his head? Taking it to regional command? Sarah had already considered that option during her sleepless night. "If I go over Morrison's head with this and I'm wrong, my career is over. And if I go over his head and I'm right but nothing happens, my career is still over. Morrison will make sure of that." "And if you do nothing and the Fitzgerald sails into a trap?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had asked herself the same thing 100 times since leaving the Admiral's office. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, and hearing herself say it out loud made her feel like a failure. She had always been the one with answers, with solutions. Now she felt powerless. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have a contact at Naval Intelligence Command. Someone I trust. Let me make a quiet call. Unofficial. Just to get another set of eyes on this." Hope sparked in Sarah's chest. "Would you do that?" "Sarah, if there's even a chance you're right about this, we have to try. I'll make the call this morning." After Marcus left, Sarah tried to focus on her regular duties, but her eyes kept drifting back to the satellite feeds. The vessels were still there, still moving in their calculated pattern. She tracked them obsessively, updating her predictions every hour. By midday, reality of her situation had begun to spread. Walking to the cafeteria, Sarah noticed the stares and whispers. A group of junior analysts stopped talking when she passed. At lunch, the table where she usually sat was full, with no one offering to make room. Lieutenant Rebecca Park, who had been friendly enough before, actually turned away when Sarah tried to make eye contact. Sarah ate alone at a corner table, trying to ignore the burning sensation of being watched, being judged, being dismissed. This was what it meant to challenge the system, she realized. This was the price of speaking up when those in power didn't want to listen. She was throwing away her trash when Commander Wells approached her. His expression was stern, almost angry. "Lieutenant Chen, a word." Sarah followed him to a quiet corner of the cafeteria. Wells crossed his arms and looked down at her with barely disguised contempt. "I'm going to give you some advice," he said, his voice low. Stop this crusade you're on. Stop spreading panic about non-existent threats. And for God's sake, stop trying to undermine Admiral Morrison's authority. Sir, I'm not trying to undermine anyone. I'm trying to do my job. Your job is to analyze intelligence and report it. You've reported it. It was reviewed and dismissed. That's where your job ends. But instead, you're here at all hours, pulling data, building conspiracy theories. I hear you're even trying to go around Morrison to other commands. Sarah's stomach dropped. Marcus had been careful, but somehow word had gotten out anyway. Or maybe they were just assuming. I'm following up on legitimate intelligence concerns, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. No, Lieutenant, you're being insubordinate. And worse, you're damaging your own reputation. Do you know what people are saying about you? They're saying you're obsessed, unstable, that you can't handle the pressure of the job. That's not fair. Fair? Wells actually laughed. You want to talk about fair? Admiral Morrison has 30 years of experience. He's commanded ships, led missions, made decisions that saved lives. And you, with your 8 years behind a computer screen, you think you know better than him? That's not fair, Lieutenant. That's arrogant. Sarah felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Wells. I'm only trying to protect American sailors, sir. Then protect them by doing your job correctly and trusting your superiors to make the right decisions. Last chance, Chen, drop this, move on, or face the consequences. Wells walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. That evening, Marcus found her still in the intelligence room. His face told her everything before he even spoke. My contact looked at your analysis, he said quietly. He said it was interesting but inconclusive. Without more concrete evidence, he can't justify raising it to higher levels, he said. He said I should tell you to trust Morrison's judgment. Sarah nodded slowly. She had expected this. Of course they would all close ranks. Of course they would protect each other. There's something else, Marcus said, looking uncomfortable. Morrison's called a department meeting tomorrow morning. Word is he's going to use it as a teaching moment. About the importance of not letting imagination override solid intelligence practices. Sarah, I think he's going to use your report as an example. He's going to humiliate you in front of everyone. Sarah sat down heavily. This was it then. This was how her career would end. Not with honor or achievement, but with public humiliation and dismissal. She would become a cautionary tale. The overeager female analyst who couldn't handle the pressure. Who saw threats that weren't there. Who questioned her superiors and paid the price. Maybe I'm wrong, she whispered. Maybe I have been seeing patterns that aren't there. Marcus grabbed her shoulder. Sarah, look at me! I've worked with you for years. I've seen your analysis save lives. You have instincts that most analysts would kill for. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. But what if this time I'm wrong? What if I've let my ego or my pride cloud my judgment? And what if you're right? Sarah looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. The Fitzgerald sails in 48 hours, Marcus said. Whatever you're going to do, you need to decide soon. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the dark intelligence room, surrounded by screens that showed a threat no one else would acknowledge. She thought about her father, who had served in the Navy for 25 years. She thought about the oath she had taken when she joined. She thought about the sailors on the Fitzgerald, going about their duties, trusting that people like her would keep them safe. And she made her decision. If no one would listen to her through official channels, she would find another way. She would document everything. She would create a record. And if something happened to the Fitzgerald, there would be proof that she had tried to warn them. It wasn't much. But it was all she had left. The department meeting the next morning was exactly as terrible as Sarah had feared. Admiral Morrison stood at the front of the briefing room, with 30 intelligence personnel seated before him. Sarah sat in the back row, her spine straight, her face carefully neutral. Today I want to talk about the difference between analysis and assumption, Morrison began, clicking to a slide that showed Sarah's report, her name clearly visible at the top. Recently, one of our analysts brought me coordinates for what she believed was a hostile military operation. This analyst had convinced herself, through selective interpretation of data, that routine maritime traffic represented a threat. Sarah felt every eye in the room shift toward her. Some looks were sympathetic. Most were not. Morrison continued, methodically dismantling her analysis point by point. He made it sound foolish, amateurish, the work of someone who didn't understand basic intelligence principles. He never said her name again. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. The lesson here, Morrison concluded, is that we must always guard against confirmation bias. We must not let our desire to find threats lead us to create them out of nothing. Intelligence work requires discipline, restraint, and trust in our chain of command. When the meeting ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding Sarah's eyes. She gathered her things slowly, waiting until the room was nearly empty before standing. Lieutenant Chen, she turned to find Morrison watching her from the front of the room. I hope you understand that wasn't personal, he said. It was instructional. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I understand perfectly, sir. Good, then we can move forward. I'm reassigning you to infrastructure analysis for the next month. Computer security reviews, facility assessments. It'll give you a chance to reset. Infrastructure analysis. It was busy work. It was a punishment. It was Morrison's way of benching her, removing her from any real intelligence operations. "Yes, sir," Sarah said, because there was nothing else she could say. She spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically going through her new assignments. But every hour she checked the satellite feeds on her personal laptop. The vessels were still there, still positioning, still moving toward intercept coordinates. That evening, Sarah did something she had never done before. She copied all of her analysis, all of her evidence onto an encrypted drive. It was against protocol to remove classified information from the base. It could cost her everything. But she did it anyway because she needed to know that the truth would survive, even if her career didn't. At home, she uploaded everything to a secure cloud server. Then she wrote a detailed memo, explaining everything she had found, everything she had tried to do, and how she had been dismissed. She addressed it to the Naval Inspector General but didn't send it. Not yet. If the Fitzgerald passed through safely, she would delete everything and accept that she had been wrong. She would live with the humiliation and rebuild her career if she could. But if something happened, if her worst fears came true, this would be her insurance, proof that she had tried to warn them. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through the motions of her new assignment, reviewing firewall protocols and security camera placements, while her mind was thousands of miles away, following a Navy destroyer as it sailed toward potential danger. The Fitzgerald was scheduled to enter the disputed zone at 600 the following morning. Sarah barely slept that night, lying in bed and watching the hours tick by on her phone. At midnight, she gave up on sleep and drove to a 24-hour diner near the base. She sat in a booth with cold coffee, her personal laptop hidden from view, watching the vessel tracking data she had saved. The clusters were in position now, perfectly positioned. If this was innocent maritime traffic, it was the most coincidental arrangement Sarah had ever seen. At 0400, she couldn't take it anymore. She drove back to the base, badged in, and went straight to the intelligence room. A night shift skeleton crew was on duty, and they barely glanced at her. Sarah pulled up the official satellite feeds on her terminal, her heart pounding. 1 hour until the Fitzgerald reached the zone. Sarah's hands shook as she watched the screens. She thought about calling someone, making one last attempt to raise the alarm. But who would listen? She had already been dismissed, humiliated, and reassigned. Any further action would be career suicide. But what was a career compared to the lives of the 300 sailors aboard the Fitzgerald? She picked up the phone and dialed Marcus's cell. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Sarah? It's 5 in the morning. What's wrong?" "The Fitzgerald enters the zone in 1 hour. Marcus, I need to do something. I need to try one more time." "Sarah, we've been through this. There's nothing." "Then I'll go to the media. I'll contact someone in Congress. Sarah, stop. Listen to me. If you go public with classified intelligence, you won't just lose your career. You'll go to prison. Military prison. Is that what you want?" Sarah closed her eyes. She knew he was right. But the thought of sitting here doing nothing, watching and waiting while, "Stand by," one of the night shift analysts suddenly called out. "I'm picking up radio traffic from the Fitzgerald. They're reporting unknown vessels in their vicinity." Sarah's head snapped up. She dropped the phone and rushed over to the analyst's station. "What kind of vessels?" she demanded. The analyst, a young ensign she didn't know, looked confused by her intensity. They're still identifying. Multiple contacts appearing on radar. Captain's ordered a course change to... Wait, there's more traffic coming in." Sarah watched the screen over his shoulder, her blood turning to ice. The Fitzgerald's position was marked in blue. Surrounding it, exactly where Sarah had predicted, were dozens of red contacts. "Get Admiral Morrison," Sarah said urgently. "Get him now." "Ma'am, it's 500. I can't just... Those vessels have surrounded an American destroyer. Get the Admiral now." The ensign grabbed his phone, but Sarah was already moving. She ran to her own terminal and pulled up every piece of analysis she had compiled. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, updating the vessel positions in real time, comparing them to her predictions. They matched. Every single coordinate matched her predictions. More analysts were arriving now, called in by the emergency. Commander Wells rushed in, his uniform hastily assembled. "What's the situation?" he barked. "The Fitzgerald is reporting multiple unknown vessels in close proximity," the ensign reported. They're attempting to identify and assess intent. Wells moved to the main display screen. Sarah could see his face pale as he took in the tactical situation. "Those are the coordinates," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the room. "Those are the exact coordinates I reported to Admiral Morrison 3 days ago." Wells turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than dismissal in his eyes. She saw fear. Admiral Morrison arrived 15 minutes later. By then, the intelligence room was in full crisis mode. The Fitzgerald was surrounded by 37 vessels, all maintaining a precise distance. None responding to radio hails, none showing identification. Morrison's eyes swept the room and landed on Sarah, still at her terminal, pulling up her original report and overlaying it with the current positions. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice tight. "Your report. Pull it up on the main screen." Sarah's hands shook as she complied. The room fell silent as her analysis appeared on the large display. The predicted vessel positions, the projected timing, the warning about the Fitzgerald's route, the match was undeniable. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "I have 3 days of additional analysis, updated positions, movement patterns, and communication intercepts I pulled from the database. I can have them coordinated and sent to the Fitzgerald's captain in 10 minutes. Morrison stared at the screen for a long moment. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the recognition of what this meant. He had dismissed a legitimate threat. He had mocked the analyst who tried to warn him. And now an American ship was in danger. "Do it," he said. "Get everything to the Fitzgerald. Wells, contact Pacific Command. Get me every available asset in the region. Chen..." He turned to Sarah and his voice was different now. Respectful. "What else do we need to know?" Sarah took a deep breath and stepped up to the main display. This was her moment. Not for vindication or revenge, but to do what she had always been meant to do. Protect American lives. Based on the movement patterns, these vessels are maintaining an encirclement formation, but not closing distance. That suggests this is intimidation, not an immediate attack posture. The Fitzgerald can create an exit vector here. She pointed to a gap in the formation. But they'll need to do it soon before the vessels adjust position. For the next 4 hours, Sarah became the central coordinator of the crisis response. Everything she had documented, every piece of analysis she had compiled while being mocked and dismissed, now became critical intelligence. She worked with the Fitzgerald's captain directly, feeding him real-time updates on vessel movements, identifying the safest route out of the encirclement. Admiral Morrison stood behind her, watching as she orchestrated the response with calm precision. Other analysts gathered around her station, asking questions following her lead. Commander Wells coordinated with Pacific Command, but even he kept looking to Sarah for confirmation of positions and predictions. "Lieutenant, the Fitzgerald is asking about the vessel at bearing 270, one of the communication officers called out. "They're showing unusual movement." Sarah pulled up the thermal imaging for that sector. "That's the command vessel," she said immediately. "I identified it 2 days ago based on communication frequency patterns. Tell the Fitzgerald to watch it closely. Where it goes, the others will follow." The information was relayed. Minutes later, the Fitzgerald reported that Sarah was correct. As the command vessel shifted, the entire formation began to adjust. "She's reading them like a book," someone muttered. Sarah wasn't thinking about vindication. She wasn't thinking about the people who had doubted her. Her entire focus was on the blue dot representing the Fitzgerald and the 300 souls aboard. Every decision she made could mean life or death. "The exit vector is closing," she warned. "Captain needs to commit now or wait for the next rotation in 45 minutes. Morrison leaned over her shoulder. "Your recommendation, Lieutenant?" Sarah studied the patterns, running calculations in her head. The formations rotate every 90 minutes like clockwork, but each rotation brings them slightly tighter. If the Fitzgerald waits, the next window will be narrower and riskier. "Sir, I recommend they go now." Morrison picked up the direct line to Pacific Command. "This is Admiral Morrison. I'm recommending the Fitzgerald proceed on the exit vector identified by our intelligence team. Immediately." There was a pause. Then, "Fitzgerald is acknowledging. They're coming about." Increasing speed. The room held its collective breath as the blue dot began to move. Sarah's eyes tracked every vessel in the formation, watching for any adjustment. Any sign that they would move to block the escape route. "Vessel cluster echo is shifting," an analyst called out. Sarah's heart jumped. "Hold on, let me see their vector." She pulled up the tracking data. No, they're maintaining formation. They're not pursuing. Fitzgerald is clear. Slowly over the next 30 minutes, the Fitzgerald pulled away from the encirclement. The unknown vessels maintained their positions, making no attempt to follow. By 1,000 hours, the destroyer was safely out of the disputed zone and heading toward friendly waters. The intelligence room erupted in relieved applause. Analysts high-fived each other. Someone clapped Sarah on the shoulder. But she just sat back in her chair, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining away. It was over. The Fitzgerald was safe. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the celebration. "Lieutenant Chen, my office now." The room went quiet. Sarah stood on shaking legs and followed the Admiral down the corridor. Commander Wells trailed behind them. Sarah's mind raced. Was she still in trouble? Despite being right, despite saving the ship, had she violated too many protocols to be forgiven? Inside Morrison's office, the Admiral closed the door and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. "Sir," Sarah began. Morrison held up a hand. "Let me speak first." He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant. A significant one. You brought me credible intelligence and I dismissed it. Worse than that, I dismissed you. I let my assumptions about a lot of things cloud my judgment." Sarah stood at attention, unsure how to respond. "You were right," Morrison continued. "About all of it. The coordinates, the pattern, the timing. If I had listened to you 3 days ago, the Fitzgerald would never have entered that zone. 300 sailors were put at risk because I was too arrogant to seriously consider your analysis." "Sir, the important thing is that everyone is safe," Sarah said quietly. "No, Lieutenant, that's not the only important thing." Morrison moved to his desk and picked up a file. "I've been in the Navy for 32 years. I've made a lot of good decisions in that time. But I've also made mistakes. Usually I'm man enough to admit them. This was one of my worst." He handed the file to Sarah. She opened it and saw a formal commendation letter. "I'm recommending you for the Defense Meritorious Service Medal," Morrison said, "for exceptional intelligence analysis that prevented a potential international incident and ensured the safety of American naval personnel. I'm also recommending you for immediate promotion to Lieutenant Commander." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You earned it." Morrison paused. "I'm also going to be recommending some changes to our intelligence review protocols. Because if a senior officer can dismiss critical intelligence without proper evaluation, we have a systemic problem. Your case is going to be used as a teaching example, Lieutenant. But this time it'll be about the importance of listening to our analysts, regardless of their rank or anything else." Commander Wells, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Chen, I also owe you an apology. The things I said to you, the way I spoke about you to others, it was unprofessional and it was wrong. You showed exceptional courage, standing by your analysis even when everyone told you that you were wrong. That's the kind of integrity this service needs." Sarah felt tears threatening, but this time they were different tears. Not frustration or anger or humiliation. Something else. Something like relief. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "There's one more thing," Morrison said. "Pacific Command wants you to brief them on the vessel patterns you identified. They're treating this as a major intelligence development. You'll be flying to Hawaii tomorrow to present your full analysis. Consider it the first assignment of your new position." "New position, sir?" "I'm moving you to Strategic Intelligence Assessment. You'll be leading a team focused on identifying emerging threats in the Pacific region. You'll have full access to satellite resources and direct reporting authority." Lieutenant Commander. "We need analysts who can see what others miss. You've proven you're one of them." Sarah left Morrison's office in a daze. In the hallway, she found Marcus waiting, a huge grin on his face. "I heard," he said. "I heard everything. Sarah, they're already talking about you. You're a legend." "I don't want to be a legend," Sarah said. "I just wanted to do my job. You did more than that. You stood up when everyone told you to sit down. You trusted your analysis when everyone told you that you were wrong. That takes guts." As word spread through the base, Sarah's experience shifted dramatically. Analysts who had avoided her in the cafeteria now wanted to shake her hand. Officers who had whispered about her now nodded with respect as she passed. Even Lieutenant Rebecca Park, who had turned away from her just days before, approached her with an apology. "I should have supported you," Rebecca said. I knew your work was solid, but I was afraid of being associated with someone who was going against Morrison. I took the easy path. You took the right one." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment looking at the maps and printouts she had spread across her walls. She thought about taking them down, putting everything away. But instead, she left them up. They were a reminder of what she had learned. She had learned that being right wasn't enough. She had learned that speaking truth to power came with a cost. She had learned that she was stronger than she had known. But most importantly, she had learned that some things were worth fighting for, even when you had to fight alone. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father, a retired Navy captain who had heard about the incident through the veteran network. "Heard what you did. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. You're the kind of officer this Navy needs. Love, Dad." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Just doing what you taught me. Never give up on the truth." The next morning, as Sarah prepared for her flight to Hawaii, Admiral Morrison called one final meeting. He gathered the entire intelligence division in the main briefing room. "Yesterday," he began, "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen prevented what could have been a catastrophic international incident. She did this despite being dismissed, despite being doubted, and despite facing significant professional pressure to drop her investigation. Today, I want everyone in this room to understand something. This is what right looks like." He pulled up the image of the Fitzgerald, safely docked after its close call. 300 sailors came home because one analyst refused to be silenced. Because she trusted her training, her instincts, and her evidence more than she feared the consequences of speaking up. This is the standard I expect from every person in this division. Not blind obedience, but thoughtful courage. Not yes men and yes women, but analysts who will tell me what I need to hear, even when it's not what I want to hear. Morrison looked directly at Sarah. "Lieutenant Commander Chen has set an example that I hope each of you will follow. The Navy doesn't need people who are afraid to be wrong. It needs people who are brave enough to be right even when it's difficult." The room burst into applause. Sarah stood as her colleagues, her peers, her team, recognized her not for being a woman in a man's world, not for being young or overeager, but for being exactly what she had always been, an exceptional analyst who refused to compromise the truth. As she flew to Hawaii that afternoon, Sarah looked out the window at the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly below. Somewhere down there, the Fitzgerald was sailing safely. Somewhere down there, those mysterious vessels were still in formation, their intentions still unclear. There would be more threats, more challenges, more moments when she would have to stand alone and trust herself against doubt and opposition. But now she knew she could. Now she knew that the truth defended with courage and backed by evidence would eventually prevail. Not always easily. Not always quickly, but eventually. Sarah opened her laptop and began preparing her briefing for Pacific Command. She had vessel patterns to explain, threat assessments to present, and recommendations to make. She had work to do. And finally, people were ready to listen. The Admiral had dismissed her report. Until the coordinates proved her right. And in being proven right, Sarah had proven something far more important. That courage, competence, and conviction could overcome doubt, prejudice, and dismissal. She was more than a female analyst fighting for recognition. She was a United States naval officer, doing the job she had sworn to do, protecting the people she had sworn to protect, and no one would ever dismiss her again.